while we're on the theme of cleaning things up a little bit, I thought it would be nice to use this opportunity to make the code a little bit more modular. You've probably noticed that we've been throwing all of the code into this one file, this app.js. But if we continue this trend, this file is going to get pretty large. So let's take a quick few minutes to actually reorganize the code a little bit and get it into a more modular format. To do this, I'm going to create two new directories. One is going to be called config, and the second is going to be called controllers. Now, anyone that's familiar with MVC, or Model View Controller, might kind of have an idea of where I'm going with this. But let's get started with the actual refactoring part. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file in the config directory, and I'm going to call this helper functions. And what this file is actually going to contain is this stuff, our responding functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and I'm going to paste it into this file. Now, one thing with Node.js that you may or may not be familiar is whenever you're including something from an external file, so we're going to be including this in app.js, you have to use this module.exports. And what this does is it just says, make whatever I'm attaching to this publicly available. Publicly expose this function to whatever requires this particular file. So I'm going to create a function called success, and by doing module.exports.success, I'm making this function publicly available. So actually, this was the respond function, so let's leave that one, but we're doing that over here, sorry. So module.exports.success is equal to function, same as before. And we're going to call this helper functions.js. And we're going to do the same thing below to the failure function and say module.exports.failure is equal to function. So now the success and the failure function are publicly available to any file that will require this helper functions.js file. And to give a further indication that the respond function is a private function that should exist within this file only, let's prefix it with an underscore. So in order to include the helper functions file within our app.js, it's pretty simple, but we're going to get to that after we do a couple more quick refactorings. So another file that I want to go ahead and create is a file called setupcontroller.js. And what that file is going to contain is just the configuration of the server that we do over here. So we can go ahead and copy that. And we can go ahead and say module.exports is equal to function. This is an anonymous function, and it's going to take two arguments, server and restify. Because if we don't pass these two objects into this file, they'll be undefined, and this file won't be able to access them or know that they exist. So because server and restify are used here and here, we have to actually pass them in to this file. And this file is in controllers, and we can just call it setupcontroller.js. So that takes care of configuring our server. And one more file that we want to go ahead and create is one that stores the user routes. So all of these server.get, server.post, etc. have to do with modifying user information. So it makes sense to create another file which we can again put in controllers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap all of this as before in module.exports is equal to function. It's going to take a server because we use server heavily throughout these routes. And what we're going to do is indent this a little bit, and voila. But we're not completely done because these success and failure functions will not be defined. So what I have to do is this helper function .js that contains that information is going to have to be included in this file. So I can say var helpers is equal to require, and we specify the relative path, which is going up a directory into the config directory, into helper functions. I'll specify the JS even though you do not have to. And we can say that this is called user controller.js. So now that we've included our helpers, we actually have to reference it each time we use one of our success or failure functions. So we can just copy and paste helpers dot everywhere. Be explicit about exactly what we're doing. And then last but not least, I'm also going to take the fake database that we have here. Go ahead and get rid of this code here. And I'm going to define our fake database up here. So what did we do here? What we did was we separated everything out into helper functions, into our setup controller, and into a user controller, which has all of the user specific knowledge, the setup specific code, and the helper stuff all separated out. And that actually leaves our app.js in a pretty minimalistic and clean state, except that we still have to include these files that we just created. So bear with me for one more moment here. What I'm going to do is say var setup controller is equal to require, and we're going to specify the path, which is relative to the current directory in controllers, setup controller. I'll specify the .js and copy and paste that to include our user controller as well. This is just requiring these two files. And now I have to actually call the anonymous functions that I made, setup controller. And this one took two arguments. It took server and restify, both of which are created and defined above. And the user controller just took the server argument. So assuming that I've made no typos, I should actually be able to run this code in Postman and get the exact same results that I was getting before. So let's go ahead and see if I've made any mistakes. I'm going to manually restart NodeMon because I've been making a bunch of changes, so it looks like it crashed. Oh, and it looks like I made a small error. Okay, I did some digging, and oddly enough, the error seems to have gone away on its own. So I'm not sure what happened, but everything seems to be working. And in Postman, I'm able to make API calls as I was before. So this is the longest lesson in the entire course, but don't be discouraged if it seems like it was a lot or if it was a lot to digest, because I'm going to be attaching the full code up until this point to this lesson. So if you run into any errors or you bump into any problems, you can just go ahead and copy and paste the exact code that I've used, and that'll eliminate any possibility that maybe you've made a typo or something, and sometimes the silliest little mistake can lead to a lot of frustration. So feel free to grab my code if you've run into any problems, and the more important part is that you understand how we've separated the code and why having a clean logical separation of code is a good thing. Okay, that's it for this lesson.